On this episode of Money and Power, RGB planks, genderless wonderlands, and SCOTUS or bust. But first, Kid Inc.
I got the money and the power. Yeah. Once you get a little, they just want to take you down, cuz we've been going hard for too long. Can't get enough, what is you on? Yeah. Really ain't nothing I could drop that. Wake up in the morning, make it all okay.
Welcome to episode 24 of Money and Power, our weekly look at questions related to finance, politics, and culture. I'm your host, Nathan Martin, and joining me from Michigan, a financial consultant and host of the Rob Talks Money and Apologetics 105 podcasts, Rob Johnson.
Howdy.
And joining me in studio here in the crown jewel of rural Ohio, a law clerk who will fight for your right in an amicus brief.
Present.
And together we are the trio of talk, the triad of the tittle-tattle, and the triumvirate of the tete-a-tete. And we have quite a show for you.
But you didn't even say who I was. You said what I did. I'm Jeremiah Martin, by the way. Oh. Welcome, listeners.
That's all they need.
I was so focused on trying not to, because I actually screwed up the writing on the your title that I forgot that. Yeah,
quote unquote title.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
That is Jeremiah, everybody. Jeremiah, how was your week?
Fantastic. Got to meet Rob for the first time in person. And that was pretty awesome. That was kind of the excitement from that was leveled out by the fact that Nebraska just completely got demolished by Michigan. But nonetheless, I had a good time at the football game on Saturday. So.
Yeah, we were by good company.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And,
until Rob decided to make it his life mission to get us beat up in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, so for context for the listeners, over 111,000 fans, a good number of those were Nebraska. Obviously, overwhelming majority was blue and maize, as they say, and but Rob was the only person in the stadium of 111,000 wearing Sparty green, and which that wasn't as bad until he refused to shut up in the fourth quarter. And I kind of enjoyed it, Nathan, because it made me feel a lot less hated, and at least there's one person in the stands that was hated more than us.
True.
So,
very true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Apparently, when you remind people of their terrible blowouts, like to Appalachian State, you're not necessarily a fan favorite.
No. Although I think I had the best line when someone was trying to give Rob some crap, and they're like, "Why are you here?" And I said, "It's because as a Michigan State fan, he wanted to see how it was to actually lose in the big house."
Yeah. So when we were first meeting him outside the stadium, I said to Nathan, "So what are the chances that he actually shows up in green?" And Nathan looks at me and says, "He's not doing that. He just said that." Sure enough, just like he said on last week's podcast.
Sure enough,
he showed up in Michigan State colors.
I was wrong.
Yeah, Rob is nothing if not a man of his word. So.
Indeed.
True.
Man of integrity. Man of integrity. Yeah. I had some witty comebacks, making fun of people a little bit, egging on some Nebraska fans. It was a good time.
I will say overall, the Michigan fans were very polite. And they were very, the people around us were very knowledgeable. There was some really bad calls.
Were they, though? I don't think that knowledgeable. I mean, it's Ann Arbor for one. Two, we were explaining rules to them. One guy was like
that is true. We did have to explain what an actual catch was.
Yes.
On that safety.
Not only that, but we had to explain to them, every time they threw, a bomb down the field and the guy didn't catch it, oh, where's the flag? It's he just dropped it, loser. Not everything that doesn't get caught is a flag for you.
Well, we did have one belligerent fan that was 3 rows behind us.
Yeah, it was great.
That was probably my favorite. The guy who turned around to us and they threw a flag on one of our plays, and he looks back and because there's a group of us Nebraska fans, and he looks back and says, "There are rules in football. You know that? There are rules." And he just kept on repeating it. "There are rules to this game. There are rules." And we're like, yeah. And someone on the field apparently didn't abide by those rules, and they did their job and enforced them by throwing a flag, right? Like that's the game, right?
Yeah. We lead the nation, I think, in penalty yards. So we are very well aware of the fact that there are rules and we're not good at following them.
Well, that's what you're missing is when that guy came out of his mom's basement that morning, he's like, "There are rules, honey. I know you're 28 and we haven't really talked about this a lot, but there are rules." So when he got to the game, that's all he knows. So when someone yells at him, he's like, "There are rules." It's like, "Okay, Timmy, calm down. It's all right."
Yeah, there was some egregious. The officiating in that game was horrible. I was actually talking to a Michigan fan who's sitting next to me, and I said, the only thing, I never thought I would say this, but the thing I miss about the Big 12 is the officiating. Like, this is there's about 2 to 3 flat out blown calls every game in the Big Ten. Like, it is bad. And I don't, with the millions upon millions of dollars that they make, they need to have their own full-time officiating crew. It's ridiculous. Because that safety was an absolute atrocious call. And then it was upheld by replay.
Not only that, but it was upheld on the Big Ten Network later that night. They agreed with it.
Yeah, which is insane. That's not a catch. He didn't have control, and he wasn't in the end zone.
Yeah.
So
probably not a solid topic for an audio podcast, but it's,
probably not.
You can just imagine it.
Imagine. I mean, it didn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
Imagine Nathan losing his mind, sitting next to me like, "That wasn't a catch. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about." He was just going nuts. It was a good time.
Yeah, it was not. It was. Yeah, we went through the 5 stages of grief in 4 quarters. We've done that a lot in Nebraska.
Not me. I got to play both sides, cheer for both teams, and then Michigan State won that night, so it was a good night. Eagles won yesterday. Yeah. It was a great weekend for Rob.
Yeah, whatever.
I got to meet Jeremiah and his dad.
Yeah.
And Nathan was there as well, so that was cool.
Rob. All right. Now it is time. You guys, and now it's time for your look back at the weird, the inane, and the general happenings going on in the world by the crazy people who live here. News bits.
Hope, you lose 56-10.
It wasn't great.
56
I'm not here to rationalize.
Oh, wait. Nope, that's not the clip. Hold on.
Yes.
Bits. Show me your bits of news.
I mean,
Today's loss.
Get one more time. 56-10. Look.
All right, that's it.
Well done, Rob. Well done.
Thank you.
I hate you so much right now. It's all right. Hey, Rob, what's your news bit?
All right. I actually don't have a news bit. So the reason why I asked you guys to talk about Nebraska at the end of the show was I was going to read this elaborate assault case in Michigan that went down over the weekend to 90 young men ages 18 to 23, and it was actually the Nebraska players getting beat down by the Michigan players. But
wow. Okay. For the record, you made a quip last week that you were excited to go see the game and see Nebraska get beat 50-0. And when it was at one point
46-0.
46-0, I was like, this is not good. That he might actually have his prediction, but nope.
Yeah,
56-10. Take that, Rob Johnson.
Yeah. So it was only a 46-point spread, not a 50-point spread.
If I had only listened to you and bet the over, I decided to take Nebraska with the points and the under in that game.
Yeah, so that was my
awesome.
news bit. I wrote this little article, and it sounded all dramatic and whatnot. And then I was gonna play that clip that I just played. So So that's it. So that's my news bit. So Nebraska got smoked. They're probably not going to win a game the rest of the season. They're going to lose to, probably Saginaw Valley State University, and then probably not be a D1 school anymore. Probably be D2 and
I
play
hope
with
that
Ball
we just
State.
win one game the rest of this year, and that's Michigan State, Rob.
Oh, that'll be cute. I'll bet you $1,000 right now and give you 20 points. They're not even going to come within 20 points of State.
$1,000 at 20.
Rob, if you could just see Nathan's look right now, it's like that is so tempting. But
I do not have a gambling problem. I do not have a gambling problem. I do not have a gambling problem. I just told myself I was never going to bet on Nebraska the rest of the year.
Good move.
And now Purdue's favored by 3.
There was a probable suicide from a Nebraska fan. That dude that was sitting in front of us was getting so pissed.
Oh, man.
He probably Hannah Bakered himself that night.
Yeah. Painful.
All right, that was my news bit.
Yeah, you just have to be worried when it stops hurting.
Yeah. I don't know what that feels like. I'm all W's this weekend, so I'll let you know.
Yeah, well, so I have a lot of friends back in Nebraska who are Vikings fans and Nebraska fans.
Those poor guys. They went to Sunday. At least we got one. No, you didn't.
Yeah, not at all. All right, Jeremiah.
All right, so this is an interesting story out of Colorado. Children's Hospital drops gender markers from patient wristbands. So Children's Hospital in Colorado has removed gender markers from patients' wristbands as a part of an effort to support their, quote, unique gender identity, end quote. The hospital said its staff understands that it's not easy growing up with an expansive gender identity or expression and believes gender-diverse children need a stable support system as they navigate their transition. So the news article goes on, but what I kind of wanted to talk about here and kind of bring out of this story is that this is a perfect example of culture. Sometimes people talk about how politics is downstream from culture, and I believe that to be true. But this isn't also an example of other things being downstream from culture as well, where we actually have medical facilities and their policies being determined by culture and not being determined by patient safety or by science or just good policy. So this is... it just boggles my mind for one, but I wanted to ask the question is, like, how deep do you guys think this goes? That is this just a little bit of virtue signaling from hospital administration, or is this actually affecting the care of patients? Because at the end of the day, men and women, obviously, and boys and girls are different at a fundamental biological level, and they need different care. They've got different needs and different symptoms between boys and girls. Pain in a lower intestine can mean something, or lower stomach can mean something different for a boy than for a girl. And you have to judge that, and you have to differentiate that. So my question is, do you think they are still doing that, but this is just a little bit of a virtue signal, or is this as dangerous as, I think it could be, depending on how far you take this to its logical conclusion?
Go ahead,
Rob?
Nathan. Go ahead. I'm actually doing a little bit of... Can I ask some questions? Are you pretty familiar with this, Jeremiah?
Yeah.
All right. So is it just for one section of the hospital? Is it for all... it's a children's hospital?
From everything that I've read, yeah, the entire hospital is a children's hospital.
Huh. Well, that's odd. Yeah, so I think this is a big so yeah, Colorado Children's Hospital. Wow. We're the place where they try to use medical and science to save lives, but don't use that to identify patients. Cool. So yeah, this is a big deal. You're very right. So, especially like in trauma. So if this is a children's hospital, then they're dealing with, major to minor cases. So if you have a girl check in with lower abdominal pain, and it's a trauma situation, you might look to something compared to if it's a boy or girl. But I guess like how many patients are coming in that aren't easily identifiable as boys and girls, or So, man, this is odd, really strange. And it's Colorado too, so it's all that weed too, getting into their brains. So Nathan might have a positive argument from last week.
Yeah, that's right. So the article actually at the very end there's a line that I actually didn't see, but it may actually have answered this question. The very last line of the article says, while gender will be omitted from wristbands, Dr. Nokoff said patient's medical history will still be recorded. Okay. And so that actually makes me lean more towards this is simply a virtue signal, yes, as opposed to actually really having any implications on care immediately. But these things don't. We've seen in other areas where these things don't stop here, and so it's still a cause of concern for me. But in this case, it may just be a cultural virtue signal.
Yeah, that was my thing. Is it in the grand scheme of things, is it a big deal? You're omitting, on your wristband that you wear, you're omitting the sex or gender all completely. Is that a big deal? Probably not, but it's not something that's determined by medical necessity. So I have a big problem with hospitals making decisions that aren't out of a customer service function or a medical necessity or safety function. And I think that can be dangerous, especially when it comes to political correctness.
Yeah. Let me jump in for a second. So I'm reading more on this. So I went to the link, and this is actually fairly concerning. So this is Children's Hospital in Colorado. So the tweet that was sent out in that Fox News article said, find out how what else we're doing with transgender patients and whatnot. So if you look at their little website here, they go down to talk about our services, and one of their services is hormone therapy and puberty blocking agents for children, obviously, who are prepubescent. So this is extremely problematic medically. Mm-hmm. Using puberty blocking medicines or endorsing puberty blocking medicines for children, and these are children, is a demonstrative biological system shock that can have long-term damaging effects. So they've jumped right over medicine and have went into virtue signaling with allowing society to determine medical outcomes rather than science, which is super problematic. So this is pretty disgusting.
Yeah, well, and when you have, I think it's the Academy of Pediatrics or whatever, and they specifically say this is bad. You can't do these kind of things. You're having children make long-term decisions. That it's very frustrating. So either we're going to treat children like children or we're going to treat them like adults, but it's so varied. You can't trust a 18-year-old with a gun. But you can have a 11-year-old decide that they want to basically cut off their genitalia. And have reassignment surgery. You right. can't trust a 16-year-old to get their ears pierced without consent from an adult. But you know what? You want to go behind your parents' back and get an abortion, have at it. It's just there's no consistency, and it's really, really, really troubling.
Yeah, so actually, they're really related to that. There was a case here in the Ohio State House not too long ago where there was legislation up for determining kind of the obviously the age of consent is determined, but determining when young females could determine that they wanted to have an abortion without the consent of their parents. What was interesting is just the session prior to that, the year before, a lot of the same people that were voting for reducing the age of consent for abortions had upheld a law maintaining the age of consent for tattoos. So you could not get a tattoo without, a minor could not get a tattoo without the approval of their parents. But the very next year, some of those same lawmakers wanted to decrease the age in which a teenager could get an abortion without their parents' consent. So yeah, to that point, I mean, these issues are they're more than just how we talk about things matter. And John Stonestreet often says, I don't think he originated the quote, but he often says that ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. And I think this is a perfect example of bad ideas. And, there are consequences and there are even victims, especially as it relates to our children and the most vulnerable among us. So, yeah, very interesting. So we'll see how that all plays out. Good job, Colorado.
Good job, Colorado.
Yeah, this is an issue that I definitely want to go into more on a full segment, because this is problematic. Not only the issue itself, but people's response to it. Because me just saying that it's disgusting to give puberty blocking medicine to someone who's 10 years old, people are like, "Oh, how dare you?" It's like, are you 10 years old? Like you don't even know what you want to do tomorrow when you're 10, and you're saying yes, you're definitely going to switch from male to female at 10. Like, give me a break. If you think I'm wrong, email me, and I'll beat you up.
Virtually, he'll just beat you up with those words, all those words, the best words.
That'd
be a great discussion. I'm definitely interested to hear what some people in the Facebook group will think about that. Jeremiah, can you post that in the Facebook group? Get a discussion going. And if you would like to join us in our discussion in the Facebook group, you can join us at moneypowerpod.com/group. GROUP group.
Yep, and that links to our private Facebook group, and a lot of good discussions. We had some really good discussions this week. So if you're not a part of that group, we would love to have you.
We touch on that a little bit we'll touch a little bit on that a little bit later. All right, so as the Kavanaugh turns, it's kind of my news bit. Obviously, we talked a little bit about this last week. It's just going into this week, and so we actually scheduled this thinking we'd have a confirmation vote already, and because we wanted to talk about SCOTUS. We want to talk about the Supreme Court and kind of the history of it and the implications of it. And it is not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think. I think this is going to drag out. And the session of the Supreme Court starts on October 1st. So that's kind of, if people are like, well, what's the hurry? Well, that's kind of it. If he's not seated by October 1st, then he's going to miss that first bank of cases. And so that's the issue, as it is. So we'll see how that continues to go. But we are still going to have a discussion on the Supreme Court. And we have reached out to the Facebook group, reached out to Twitter, reached out to on our Facebook page. And we wanted to get your guys' questions on the Supreme Court. So we're going to try to answer some of those. Some of them kind of historical questions, some of them philosophical questions. And but I'm going to start out by kind of discussing in general the Supreme Court and kind of a down and dirty Supreme Court 101, if you will. Jeremiah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to understand about this topic is, obviously the Supreme Court for months now, and even actually for the last probably 18 months now, since Gorsuch was nominated, and that nomination process, the Supreme Court has been brought up, and then once these things kind of pass, it's just largely forgot about until there's a major case that makes national news. And so now that the Supreme Court's back in the news, and even over the past couple months, there's just a lot of misunderstanding of what the Supreme Court's role is, what their actual authority is, and how that all plays out in reality. There's a lot of fear-mongering out there. There's a lot of, this is going to happen, and just, it's mostly just that, fear-mongering and just extreme rhetoric, and doesn't have a lot of basis in reality. So we wanted to, take some time tonight to talk about, kind of push past all of the rhetoric, push past all of even the stuff with Kavanaugh, all of that stuff largely aside, what can we learn about the Supreme Court, and can we dig a little bit deeper and hopefully learn something.
All right, so the Supreme Court was created officially in the Judiciary Act of 1789. So during the Constitutional Convention in 1787, we, as the Founding Fathers, discussed a little bit about this third branch and possibly putting the judiciary in its own branch, co-equal branch of government. This was definitely a sea change. Universally. Up to that point, the judiciary wasn't seen as an independent functionary from the executive branch. In English common law tradition, judicial matters are generally handled under the executive. And so for us to have a co-equal branch of government with the judiciary, the federal judiciary, was unknown and uncharted territory. And you can kind of tell that by the way, if you look at Article 3 of the Constitution, you can kind of see it outlined that there's some definite ambiguity. Nothing is really outlined as far as the powers and prerogatives of the Supreme Court. It just basically says Congress has the authority to set this in motion. And also, Congress has the authority to set forth their jurisdiction. So we'll get to that a little bit later. But they did establish it in 1789. Initially, the Supreme Court had 6 justices, so 5 associate justices and a chief justice. That obviously later changed. It fluctuated by law down to like 5, but it actually didn't take effect until they overrode it to 6. Then it went up to 7. Then it went up to 9. They were, by statute, was supposed to go back down to 7, but it's kind of stayed at 9 ever since. The number of Supreme Court justices is not outlined in the Constitution either, so it's up to Congress, and so that's all done by statute. And so the first United States Congress kind of outlined that we have different circuits, and that each justice is in charge of one of those different circuits. So it's a little bit different now, but in general, that's kind of the way it works. In the early years of the Supreme Court, it was really, really boring. They didn't have a lot of cases, and the reason for that is that there's no real original jurisdiction with the Supreme Court. Most of it is appellate, coming from the states trying to federal out law that way. So your original jurisdiction would be basically different foreign countries suing states, or states suing each other, or states suing the federal government. And those are things that are going to go directly to the Supreme Court, where they have original jurisdiction. But other than that, it's more of appellate. So it's going to be handling cases that come from lower courts. Every year, the Supreme Court gets around 7,000 cases that are asked by the Supreme Court to be heard. Of those 7,000 cases, they hear between 100 and 120 cases. So each justice has its own kind of standards of what certs they are going to talk through. Now, we talked about in the beginning, there wasn't really much to do, and that was until the Marshall Court. Under Chief Justice Marshall, they really started to formulate the Supreme Court that we know today. Until the Marshall Court, you would have your majority opinion, but each justice would form their own opinions, write their own opinions. And now we have a majority opinion and we have a dissent. So that was kind of formalized. Also formalized, though, were several major things when it comes to, that we now know. For example, a judicial review. So under Marshall, the court established the power of judicial review over acts of Congress. Namely, in Marbury versus Madison, that there could be judicial review as to the constitutionality of laws. Now, a lot of this is precedent set by the court itself. So one of the criticisms of the court is that it has given itself power, and whether there's actually checks and balances there. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so judicial review has been established. Also early on, there was a case because one of the checks and balances on the Supreme Court justices is impeachment. And one of the justices was impeached for basically their philosophy, their judicial philosophy. And they were not removed. And so that kind of established a precedent of an independent judiciary, where the judiciary itself was independent and they were supposed to be arbiters of this law. And so different courts have taken different attitudes. Recently, I think we've gone to more of a Federalist court, especially the Rehnquist court is more of a Federalist era court. The Warren courts and the Burger courts were more activist, and you're going to get that ebb and flow. And it is, while they are an independent judiciary, they are affected by politics a little bit. So now we get to the point where we are. And I think that these Supreme Court fights are so heated, more so and more so heated, because the Supreme Court has way too much importance. I don't think it should have as much importance as it does, because I think it should be pretty cut and dry of being a fair arbiter of the actual Constitution. But I'm an originalist, so that's my viewpoint. But there are definitely some jurists who don't hold that view and hold that we have a quote-unquote living Constitution that needs to ebb and flow with the times. So that's where that central fight is. So the first part is, should the Supreme Court be as important as it is? The answer is no, it shouldn't. Is it though? Yes, it is. And that is why we have these fights. So that's kind of the overall primer, if you will, of the Supreme Court. And so are there any specific questions that you guys have before we get into feedback or thoughts? Rob?
Yeah. So I just took out an annuity at 8%. Do you think that was a good move?
Yes. Unless you're Dave Ramsey, you can magically get 10% everywhere you go.
Very good. Thank you. That was it.
Yeah. So, Nathan, what's your favorite movie? No.
So completely. We're just not going to talk about the topic.
No. I mean, I think that was a really good, a really kind of good foundation. I've heard a lot of discussion over the years, especially in conservative circles, about how the way the Supreme Court is actually functioning is not the view of how the founding fathers would have had it. The founding fathers would not have set up a judicial branch that basically has full authority to strike down entire legislation, deeming it not constitutional, and set that precedent for for eternity, essentially. So, but while I understand that maybe the Supreme Court should not have as much power as maybe we as the citizenry assume it does, what is the fix to that, or what would be a better way of looking at that?
So to me, this is going to get me probably shot by some people, but I believe in judicial review. So we do have a constitution. So the question comes: what happens when people don't obey the Constitution? Who are the people that tell us are the arbiters of what is or is not meeting that standard, at least that base standard? Now, this is also going to get me in trouble, but I'm also in the John Chief Roberts Court of. I believe it's the court's job to try to look for every avenue to assume that Congress is acting in good faith through the Constitution and not just willy-nilly throw stuff out. That comes in your ruling on Obamacare, by the way. And that's his specific words are, it's the court's job to understand that when Congress passes a law, it is acting in that parameter, and unless it's an egregious violation of the Constitution, the court's job is to try to figure out where it could be possibly constitutional versus looking for ways to make it unconstitutional, right? And I think that's the difference between an originalist viewpoint and an activist viewpoint. So I hold to that. But again, you have to have arbiters, because sometimes Congress and sometimes the executive branch are going to do things that go against the Constitution. Now, I don't just believe that duty belongs to the judicial branch alone. I do believe that the Congress has a fidelity to the Constitution. I believe the executive branch has a fidelity to the Constitution. And I think that too often those two branches try to say, okay, what can we get away with? Constitutionality versus, I think the executive branch should veto more legislation questioning its constitutionality versus trying to pass stuff through and then try to get a favorable ruling in, the circuit that you choose to have it fought for. Where you're basically judge shopping at that point for judges that have your particular viewpoint.
So maybe a little bit deeper of a question. So when we talk about checks and balances, I agree that I think practically speaking, we have relegated checks and balances to basically be less checks and balances and more the Supreme Court is checking the other branches. And I think that that's problematic. But I think checks and balances only works when the three branches are working together in good faith towards actually following the Constitution. But as we are all humans and we are imperfect and make mistakes, that's not always going to be perfect. So my question more specifically then is, I think that the majority of the population is well aware of checks and balances as it relates to the president, as it relates to Congress, or at least more so. But more specifically, like, what checks are on the Supreme Court? Maybe mentioned impeachment, but what is there to prevent judicial activists from just determining law and not interpreting it, or doing some other things that would be outside the scope outlined in the Constitution.
Yeah, so that is one of the biggest arguments against the current system, right? You have judges who serve in good behavior, is what it states, which means that you can't even remove a justice. There's no mechanism to remove a justice for ailing health, who are mentally not capable of doing their jobs unless they decide to resign. Like there's not even a mechanism in place for that. So you have a couple ways. So you can either change the Constitution, and that's happened a couple times. The biggest one was one of the first decisions by the Supreme Court, which is Chisholm versus Georgia, and that's how we got the 11th Amendment. They basically said there wasn't any sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity didn't exist, and private citizens could sue the state. And so we put in the 11th Amendment that basically institutes sovereign immunity. We can do it, change the Constitution through an amendment process. That obviously gets really tedious. Not everything should need that. The other part is impeachment, and I think that is not the greatest. Obviously, for Supreme Court justices, there's only been one Supreme Court justice that's been impeached. They weren't removed, and that's it. And that happened in 1801, I believe. So, but there is a third check that most people don't talk about, and that is that the Congress sets the jurisdiction for the lower courts. So it's been ruled and determined that, and again by the Supreme Court, but it's been ruled and determined that Congress can't decide how a Supreme Court should rule. In other words, they can't say, if this case comes before you, you have to rule this way. However, they can choose the jurisdiction or what a court is actually allowed to look at for all the lower courts. So they can say, lower court, you're not even allowed to look at this. And you're not allowed to determine this. And of course, the big one for that was the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA. They actually wrote in there, you're not allowed to look at this. You've ruled this way. We don't agree with that. You're not allowed to look at this provision. It is what it is. So it is a check and balance that Congress is allowed to employ. And I think that Congress should employ that more often than they do. But that's the one legitimate check and balance they have on that determining factor.
Okay. So as it relates to the other branches, Congress passes a law, the president can veto that, but then Congress can overcome the veto, and so even there's a little bit of a back and forth, and it's like, well, the president doesn't want to enact this, but hey, we as the Congress, we can still do that anyway. It doesn't seem that there's as much of checks and balances in that. There's the Supreme Court in many ways has that final say, that there's really no going back and say, as Congress or the president, we're going to overcome that veto, so to speak. But and then there's also not term limits, but there is a voting process, and there is that aspect of it. So there's checks and balances there, that the president is replaced, after no more than 8 years, and Congress is replaced eventually. So through elections. So one of the questions we got from the Facebook group is lifetime appointments a good thing? You mentioned sickness. If you are actually not able to accomplish your job, there's really no process in place to remove someone for good or bad reason. So what do you think, Nathan? Is lifetime appointments, is that ultimately a good thing?
There's a couple arguments there. So it depends on how we're choosing I don't really like judicial elections because I like that independent judiciary, and I like there to be more of an appointment process for that. so especially when it comes to the Supreme Court, right? So I would definitely be against like national elections for the Supreme Court, which is something that's been pointed out. Now, if we wanted to have term limits, so if we wanted to say, okay, it's like a 20-year term, then I think I would be okay with that, to maintain some integrity on the court. Or, you're going to serve for 20 years and then it's going to be your term is looked at, and then you could be on for another 10 years or whatever it is. Just so that there's consistent looking up. But again, I think what you do there is you start getting into the independence of the judiciary. And I think that's the reason we have lifetime appointments in the first place. I don't think that it's ideal, but I don't know that there's any better system that I've seen. So your term length would either have to be set to where it can't be renewed, and it is set, and you're on for 20 years and that's it. And then you're done and you go off in the sunset and that's it. Right? So for those 20 years, because the moment you start doing renewals or anything like that, you kind of get into the point of, well, now they're trying to get that renewal, and what are they doing? Are they really acting in the best interest of what they're supposed to be doing, or as far as being that independent judiciary, or are they serving another master, right? So when it comes to the Supreme Court, we don't want them to serve two masters. We want them to serve one master, and that's the master that's Constitution, and in turn, the American people, period. And there's some real questions about whether that happens, but I'm not sure that I've seen a solution that helps that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's a really good, important point to hit home. Is I alluded to it earlier, but at the end of the day, we're fallen humans, we're imperfect humans, and our whole system of government is based around that fact that that power needs to be constrained. And we don't want, one person to have, we don't want a dictatorship, even if it's a benevolent dictator. Eventually that dictator is not going to be benevolent. And so how do we restrict, in some ways, how do we restrict human nature? How do we restrict that potential for greed and power hungry? And that's a difficult balancing wire often, because we haven't always done that perfectly. But I think that's a good question to ask, though. This might not be a good system, or it might not be a perfect system, but do you know of a better system? And I think that was well said, Nathan, that there are issues. There might be issues to a lifetime appointment, but there's also issues to a set term, or to elections, or to having to renominate for the next term, or et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, because people generally just want terms when it comes to justices they don't like, right? Like, we wanted Scalia on that sucker as long as possible. I want Justice Thomas on there as long as possible, right? And it's the Ruth Bader Ginsburg's that I'm like, why is she on there for life, right? And then that's kind of when you have to catch yourself and realize that, all in all, as long as they're serving the Constitution, that we just need more originalists and people that aren't activist-minded, that aren't trying to read things into the Constitution, because I think we have expanded the scope of what the Constitution was initially meant to be anyways. I mean, I think there's a lot of issues where we should just be able to say, you know what, 10th Amendment, all right, it's in the state's hands. And I understand that the 14th Amendment and stuff complicates that, but it's just that's kind of my overall viewpoint on that, is we need more originalists. And again, originalists doesn't mean that they're going to rule conservatively. It just means that they're going to say, you know what, we have a certain adherence to the Constitution. We need to call balls and strikes and not try to determine the outcome of the game.
Well, I think that's one of the problems with this conversation. I think even with the nomination of Gorsuch to the Supreme Court last year, or with Kavanaugh now, is there's this conversation, and I think it's probably a poorly worded conversation of conservative justices versus liberal justices, and what people read into that is Republican justices and Democrat justices.
Yes.
And the problem with that is that it becomes a political football. But what we're really talking about here, when someone says conservative justice, a better way of saying that is originalist, a textual originalist that's going to look at the Constitution for how it was intended to be understood, and not reading a word in reading rights into the Constitution that weren't there initially, or reading issues into the Constitution that weren't there, and that can be a problem when we're discussing what the definition of is as it relates to the Constitution. That becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So one of the questions related to that, one of the questions that we got from listener Kevin Small was, asking us to discuss, a strict constructionism versus a loose constructionism. And so personally, I come from a more of an originalist mindset. That's the type of Supreme Court justice that I want to see there. It just makes sense. Reading the Constitution as it was written, and not basically making it up as you go to be what you want it to be. The Constitution is not all things to all people at all times. It is in a specific context, and that needs to be understood. So what is the argument for more of a loose constructionism? What is the argument against an originalist view of the Constitution? Have you heard something that's convincing and not just like, well, it doesn't agree with my politics?
Well, I say the argument, I think that the people that make this argument don't understand originalism, right? So the argument goes like this: there are things in place right now that could not be foreseen by the founding fathers, right? So I have a working computer in my pocket. I have like how do we apply the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and all, like, to our current day? Like, we can't. They had no clue what was going on, so their thoughts on what this meant are pretty much null and void, because they didn't see a world where this stuff existed. So we kind of have to just decide the best way we do. Okay, so I understand that viewpoint, being that, yes, you're right. When it comes to search and seizures and stuff like that, like or having soldiers in your home, how does that apply to 2018? My point, though, on originalism is that there are certain principles we can gain from that, and we can apply those across the board. So it's not that we have a living, breathing Constitution; is that we're taking the constitutional principles and we're applying them to a different situation that may have been unforeseen, but it really doesn't matter.
Right.
So where we get into problems is where we start seeing things in the Constitution that just aren't there. Where we start taking a right to privacy, which right to privacy mentioned in the Constitution? No, it's not. But the sentiment of a right to privacy is obviously there when it comes to illegal search and seizures, etc. Okay, and this got Bork into trouble, but is it mentioned in the Constitution? No. Is it there in principle? I would say that we all agree that a right to privacy is there in principle, just because we have the ability to protect ourselves from illegal search and seizures. We have ability to protect ourselves from having soldiers quartered in our home. So I think that right to privacy is there. Does right to privacy, though, apply to birth control? Or does right to privacy then apply to a broad description where there's a constitutional right to abortion? And those things are what I would call logical leaps that a non-constructionist, a non-originalist would take. But it's like, where does that end? So basically then what we've taken is this federal constitutional document that really is supposed to talk about the limiting powers and scope of the federal government, and we've made it apply to everything in everybody's everyday lives.
Right.
And so when you have a situation where you essentially have every right to do what I agree with, but no right to do anything I disagree with, that's not true freedom or liberty. And we've gotten away from that. So it's not that we can't apply it to certain things that are going on now. It's that the way we apply it. Are we applying it in a way that we're actually trying to restrict people's the notional understanding of liberty? And even if we're supposedly going to a libertine philosophy of anything goes, you're still restricting other people's liberty because you're still making choices. You're still choosing one amendment or the other, right? So even within the First Amendment, what's more important, the freedom of religion or the freedom of speech? And sometimes those are going to become in conflict. What's more important, the 14th Amendment and due process or freedom of religion? Like there are going to be some conflict points. What's more important, executive privilege or congressional oversight? And so you're going to have an arbiter in that process to help work through what actually is more important when those things come into conflict. And that's what the independent judiciary is supposed to do.
No, I think that's really good. So one of the things that I've heard recently as it relates to the Supreme Court is this conversation of settled law. And so people will often point to whether it be Roe v. Wade, whether it be Dred Scott, whether it be other cases, and talk about this is settled law. It's determined. We can't go back. We can't relook at this. So number one, I think people have a misunderstanding of what that means. Everything was settled law until it wasn't. Slavery was settled law until it wasn't. Jim Crow was settled law until it wasn't. And so how my question there is, how does that work as it relates to overturning cases that are poorly decided or maybe don't fit that model of an originalist view of the Constitution? And then does checks and balances come into play, where is it actually Congress's duty to pass laws that maybe don't fit the precedent set by the Supreme Court, but that they believe are constitutional for them to then be decided and potentially, overthrow certain cases? Or, I mean, is that part of the checks and balances system? Is that actually the duty of Congress? Or where exactly does settled law play into this?
Well, when you talk about settled law, you're really talking about precedent. And the Supreme Court's really sucked at a lot of precedent. Well, let's just be honest. You got Plessy versus Ferguson, which is separate but equal. You got Dred Scott, which is, there are no constitutional rights for slaves. I mean, these. But in each of those cases, right, there have been it kind of ebbs and flows, right, to where, okay, now it's going to be challenged, so it's either going to be brought up again in to the Supreme Court. Or, you know what, we're going to pass the 14th and 15th Amendment and make Dred Scott not involved, right? So there's two different ways of doing that. Then you got cases like at the beginning of the 19th century, where they determined that any kind of work hour rules were against kind of the free contract. And then those obviously were continually brought back up, whether it's minimum wage laws or whatever, to where finally then the Supreme Court ruled that no minimum wage laws are constitutional, etc. So you have example after example after example of where we've either through state, federal law, or through amendment pushed the envelope and not accepted settled law. And, if you are African American in this country, you're like, thank God, right?
Right.
Because a lot of that settled law is obviously very advantageous to African Americans, especially any of the Jim Crow and all that kind of stuff, right? Because there you got pushed back in the opposite way of, we're not going to follow the Supreme Court. We're going to, let the Supreme Court enforce their own stupid laws, So where you get the Trail of Tears and you get all the things. So there's been pushback on several fronts on that judicial supremacy. What we hear talked about settled law today, let's face it, it's only about one case, and one case only is Roe v. Wade. That's all people really care about when it comes to quote-unquote settled law today, and that's Roe v. Wade. Is Roe v. Wade settled law? And so whenever a justice is asked that, what do you believe about precedent? What do you believe about precedent of the court? What do you believe? And I believe it's called stare decisis, I believe. And I might have the Latin wrong on that. But, what do you, whenever there's a conservative justice that's asked that, it is 100% about one ruling and one ruling only, and that is Roe v. Wade, where it's the creme de la creme, so to speak. It is the untouchable. It is the thing that must be protected at all costs, and so you kind of have to be careful when you come to that. Rob.
Oh, hey. I thought you guys were treating me like the kids in high school and just thought I didn't exist. So, so a couple things. I agree. Plessy versus Ferguson is huge. So when people talk about settled law, it's difficult to use that argument and then still be like, oh yeah, what about in the 50s when we're like, hey, you know what? Black and white people need to be in different rail cars. And then one thing I wanted to comment on quickly was the term limits. In my opinion, I think the way that we're nominating Supreme Court justices right now is on point. I don't think there should be term limits. If they were good enough to sit on the bench the first time around, what changes? And if something did change, then that's when we would invoke that very obscure, rarely used impeachment process. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion for sure. The separate law, or the settled law rather, is basically it's Americans change their consensus over time. For example, in 1960, interracial marriage was only favored by about 10% of the people. Now in 2016, the latest data that I've seen is about 90%. So people change their opinions on things as time progresses. We saw this with slavery and women's rights. So things can change, and things very well do change, and the court ought to reflect our opinions and positions as a society within the context of the Constitution, which is a very difficult thing to do, and it's a difficult thing for people that parse, especially politically, because they look at electing judges who are on the left or right, or in favor of abortion or not, and it's a tough thing to navigate our current views and positions because they've changed so much in the last 200 years against what the Constitution says against what's right for society. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So, do we have any more questions?
No, that's it for that. I mean, obviously with the Facebook group, if you're, like I said, if you're not a part of that, we'd encourage you to join there. The quick link to that is moneypowerpod.com/group. And if you ask to join that, we'll let you in. And this conversation is most likely going to continue in the comments section there. And so if you have any questions that aren't answered or haven't been answered on this topic, then we would encourage you to go to the group and let us know, and we'll walk through it, or put it to the group and see what they say as well. So
yeah, and we have really good contests going on right now, so we're constantly giving away some free stuff in the group, and the details are of course in the group itself. So
yeah, that's right. So we have this contest going on. We're giving away. It's funny because I originally said we're giving away a total of 3 prize packs, and so far we've only had 2 people enter the contest. And so hey, that's pretty good odds. If you're not in that group, or even if you are in that group and you haven't checked the pinned post at the top of the page to get the instructions on how to enter that contest, I would encourage you to do so, because if not, we're only going to give out 2 prize packs, and it'll be to the only 2 people that have entered, a couple of our original listeners, Kevin Small and Tony Vance. And so...
we had 3 entries, but Rob then was told and crushed him when he realized he wasn't eligible.
Yep, precisely.
So then he tried to get his wife to enter and
Squash
yeah,
that.
Yeah. It's like, come on, Rob. Rob's always looking for the free stuff. So
Yeah,
For sure.
all right. Okay.
For sure. I don't understand it. There's probably 40 people in that group right now, and I don't know if they can't read or what, but it's pretty simple. It's free stuff. I know I just insulted most of our listener base, but it's that kind of night. Leave a review. What are you doing with your life? I mean, come on.
yeah. So definitely go to moneypowerpod.com/group and check out the pinned post and the instructions on how to leave a review of the podcast and how to enter into the contest. So we would love to have you there and love to continue that conversation there.
So one of my favorite things to look up on the internet are the videos of Ruth Bader Ginsburg sleeping in various places and locations. She's like she's always the one that's going to be like first justice sleeping at the State of the Union address, right? That would not be a problem though if she would just use our coupon code and get some strikeforceenergy.com.
That's right.
This episode of Money and Power is brought to you by Strikeforce Energy. You can use that discount code that I was aforementioned of MAP for 20% off all of your orders at strikeforceenergy.com.
Yep.
You know what? It's pretty simple. All she has to do is get a standard half-liter water bottle, 16-ounce glass, add one packet, and it would churn her water into a full power energy drink. Sugar-free, calorie-free, adds an explosion of energy and flavor to any beverage. Even liberal justices on the Supreme Court.
That's right.
It doesn't discriminate. Liberal, conservative, it doesn't care. It will pep you up, put some more pep in your step. And yes, use the discount code MAP, 20% off your order at strikeforceenergy.com. Strikeforceenergy.com. Say goodbye to those cheap imitation, sugary, high, low, crash drinks that you get at the store. Kick the can, people. Kick the can.
If you think
I'm not
Jesus
gonna
did
lie.
a miracle turning water into wine, you ain't seen nothing yet.
That's right. I'm not gonna lie. I would watch that C-SPAN segment if we could get the notorious RBG to drink some Strikeforce Energy. I would watch that C-SPAN all day.
I watched the video of her in her workout routine doing planks,
Nice.
and it was okay. First of all, she does these planks, and I'm like, okay, I couldn't do that for that long. She's in incredible shape. However, it was like watching a turtle run. So
What you don't know is that she was sleeping.
she's able to sleep in a plank position. You know what? Strikeforceenergy.com. She wouldn't have that problem. I don't know what's going on.
It's the rigor mortis in her legs. That's what it is. Those things just stay up.
All right. So, Jeremiah.
So a couple other feedback notes. Last week on last week's episode, we brought our infamous segment Mount Rushmore, and we talked about our Mount Rushmore of comedians. We had a couple people in the Facebook group post their Mount Rushmore of comedians. And if you have any comments or you want to send us your if you either want to send us your Mount Rushmore or you want to make fun of them for their Mount Rushmore, then you're definitely going to want to join the group. But Kevin Small posted, and he said his top four are Mitch Hedberg, solid pick, Carol Burnett, Bill Cosby, and Sinbad. So I think we're just going to leave it there and move on. But once again, if you want to comment, join the Facebook group. And then Tony Vance said Charlie Chaplin, Groucho, Pryor, and Eddie Murphy. And that's how you do it. Legends all. So
I'm just interested in how much Chaplin Tony Vance has actually watched.
Right.
And call him out on that.
That mustache style went out of style pretty quickly.
Went out with the fear.
It's like, woohoo, physical comedy. Here we go, because we have nothing else.
Yeah.
Sinbad is a horrific choice, though. Doesn't deserve, like, okay, the whole Bill Cosby thing aside, like, okay, if you want to say just as comedy, I get it. Sinbad, though, is unforgivable, Kevin. Unforgivable.
I don't understand the Bill Cosby pick, I'll be honest.
Wasn't Sinbad on the that Bill Cosby spinoff? Was it A Whole New World or whatever? Is that right? Anybody?
Never seen it.
Nope.
You're asking the wrong
Never
guy.
mind.
My favorite, I will say, I did enjoy a couple Sinbad movies. One was the first Kid, I think it was, Disney Channel original movie, and so
That was a good one. I saw that.
I enjoyed me some Sinbad, but I don't know if he's in any. I don't think he should be in anybody's Mount Rushmore of comedy, but hey,
Or Mount
more power to
Rushmore,
you.
or Mount Rushmore of anything. Unless it's like Mount Rushmore, most likely to be doing VFW shows in 10 years.
or Mount Rushmore of movies that didn't actually exist, with his Kazam movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm about to say, it's like there's always that Kazam movie he wasn't actually in, that didn't exist, that we all thought actually existed.
Yep.
But that's a topic for another day.
Yes, he was in the Cosby Show. And he was also in The Good Burger.
That was a good movie.
And Jingle All the Way, First Kid, All That TV series
Wow.
back in the day. And then, of course, he was on The Sinbad Show. A Different World. Boom. I knew it.
So what I hear you saying is that he made the Disney Nickelodeon rounds quite a bit in the 90s.
He did. He was the bee's knees. He was also in a video short called Time Out: The Truth About HIV, AIDS, and You. And on IMDb where it has like your actual title of the character you played, his character, condom.
Okay.
That's you know what? After you said that, I mean, I agree. Maybe
Maybe he does belong. I don't know.
Mount
Coneheads. Anyways, yeah, he was Coach Oaks on A Different World. I knew it wasn't crazy. So, all right.
I'd rather talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's planks than Sinbad. Can we move on?
We certainly can't. Was there any other feedback worth? Nope. All right. Getting the signal that there was not. So we're going to move on to this week's Mount Rushmore. Dun 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 dun. All right. This week's Mount Rushmore. To introduce that, I'm going to kick it over to you, Rob.
All right. So, technology is the topic at hand this week. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down our, I guess, like the 4 gadgets that either we use the most, kind of dealer's choice, that we use the most or that we think is probably the most impactful as far as it's a personal tech device. So like Tesla and SpaceX doesn't count here. So it's like a personal device that we think is fairly revolutionary that we use on the daily. So since I'm introducing the segment, I'm going to choose not to go first for once and throw it to Nathan.
Sweet. All right. So my Mount Rushmore of technical gadgets that we use on a regular basis, and it's going to be kind of an interesting list. So you guys will bear with me. My first list, though, I'm going to go way back. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to say the microwave. Perfect.
Do you carry one on your person?
You didn't say personal device.
I literally just said personal device.
Yeah, so Tesla doesn't count.
Well, I know Tesla doesn't count, but it's a microwave. Fine. Just microwave has had a profound effect on society. That's fine. I was just trying to channel my inner Vance, my inner Tony Vance, trying to play to the audience. Fine. Okay. All right. So, real talk though, I'm gonna go with the iPhone. iPhone was obviously very revolutionary. I don't know if many people remember back in the day when we actually had to carry around a separate MP3 player, and we had to carry around a separate web browser. We had to carry all this stuff. What is it? PDA, right? Personal data. I don't even know what it was. Well, I don't know what PDA even.
Palm Pilot.
Personal digital assistant.
Thank you.
Public
Yes.
display
So,
of
yeah.
affection.
So you had to have those, and then you could get the Palm 1 or whatever, which was the phone built in. Anyways, iPhones definitely changed the game, and they're relatively new too. It just constantly amazes me that it was 2007.
Yeah.
We're just 11 years removed. It feels like we've had iPhones forever, and 11 years old.
Well, I mean, we talked about that. We talked about that on our 9/11 episode. Just how for most of us, September 11th, 2001 seems like, I mean, the memory is just so clear in our minds that it doesn't seem like 17 years ago. But when you think of everything that has transpired since, and that things like the iPhone were not even comprehensible at that point. So it's pretty amazing how far we've come in just the last 11 years.
Yeah, and just think about the secondary, tertiary effects, right? So you got apps, App Store, you get all the connectivity when it comes to that. You got social media blowing up on the devices. Like, it's just, it's definitely on Mount Rushmore.
I mean, yeah. I mean, then you've got economical effects as far as entire careers that weren't even on the horizon, 12, 13 years ago. You've got people that are making, six figures and beyond, developing apps, and just entire career fields that just didn't even exist.
Yep, it's amazing what the technology does to the market. Anyways, all right. So my next one is going to be can't remember what I put.
The chest freezer. Big innovation.
It's a refrigerator. Refrigerator has changed my life. Hate you so much. Stop. All right.
Indoor plumbing.
Indoor plumbing. Guys, come on. The microwave was...
I don't know why you're struggling.
All right.
It's stuff you use every day.
I know. Fine. I'm going to go with the iPad. iPad, another revolutionary device. I'm just going to stick with the Apple products on here. And then iPad created a whole new market. And then I'm going to go with Apple Watch. And just stick with the Apple theme. And mainly because it made watches great again. I mean, hardly anybody wore a watch that was probably under the age of what would be now 30. I didn't. I'd stopped wearing a watch. Like, why? Because I have this iPhone in my pocket. But it's made wearing a watch great again, and it is the number one selling watch in the entire world. Not just like wearable tech, like just in watches generally. That, and then I'm gonna go with the MacBook, and all the different iterations that the MacBook has brought. Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi was an invention and first laid out on a Mac, and if you've ever watched that demonstration, it's pretty cheesy. But like they take a hula hoop and put it around the device as they're like searching the internet, and people are like, "What?" And I actually remember back then, people are like, "Well, why would I need this?"
Yep. Because
like I just go to my personal computer and it's there, and we plug in Ethernet. Like, why would I need Wi-Fi? And I'll imagine your life without Wi-Fi. Like literally every device here is not connected, hardwired in. Yeah. So it's just changed the world. So there you go. There's my Apple stock pick of the week, and a microwave. They don't make microwaves yet, so I'll go with that. But all right, kicking it back to you, Rob.
Super. Good. This will be a good break in the Apple series, 'cause I'm sure Jeremiah's gonna have a lot of Apple stuff on his list. And funny though how like all of your devices everything can be done with one. So the iPhone can be a watch, can basically be a computing device, and it can be your iPad as well. So pretty much the same device, just mentioned 4 times over. All right. So my picks.
My iPhone cannot do an ECG. I just want to point that out.
That's true. All right. So my 4 devices. So I'm looking just from a hardware perspective. So for a short version. So when we started doing this podcast, I started to redo some of my podcasting stuff, and I went through about 10 different laptops, Windows, Mac, to figure out what was going to be the best. Ultimately, it was the software that made the decision. So I went with a MacBook Pro. But as far as a hardware perspective, probably my favorite computer on the market right now is the Dell XPS. The neat thing about Dell is while all these other companies are soldering their RAM and soldering everything together in one giant piece, Dell is still making some really great stuff, 4K displays, but they're keeping all the components interchangeable to keep the life of the computers longer lasting. Corporations are using them more. It's a pretty amazing thing that Dell's doing with the XPS laptop. I use a MacBook Pro, which I like quite a bit, but as far as the hardware perspective, I think Dell's doing some good stuff. The next pick is the Pixel 2 XL. So the Pixel phones, when they first came out, I wasn't too crazy about them. When they upgraded to the second version, they really did a lot of neat stuff, integrating hardware and software, doing things with a camera with one lens, and complicated software that the iPhone used 2 lenses for, which is pretty interesting. Even with the new iPhones on the market, the Pixel 2 XL still has, it's very subjective, but what some people are calling still the best camera in the game. This third pick, Google Home. So this is something that I have 3 of these in my house. I like them quite a bit. I really try to like Siri, but Siri is so limited with what you can do. Google Home is it's super neat. The play between the Pixel and the home unit and the personal assistant, it's a good piece of tech. So I'm proud of Google for doing that. And if for some reason Apple can't open up Siri to do more than kind of send a text message. All right, 4th pick, iPad Pro. So this is the device I probably use the most out of anything. So I use my iPad Pro to do everything but cut podcasts. So once that becomes available, I'll probably do it on there as well. It's just a great piece of portable tech that can do basically everything: multitasking, computing, downloading, graphics editing, and the 10.5 version, the 2nd gen, when they started to change how they did the RAM and made the hardware and software work together, it was really a game changer in that 2nd gen iPad Pro. So those are my 4 picks for, I guess, game changing technology is kind of not the case, but that's the stuff that I use daily.
All right. Awesome. All right. So my number 1 pick is going to be iPhone for all of the reasons aforementioned. I currently am sporting an iPhone 7S Plus. Part of the reason that I don't have an iPad is because I've opted for the bigger screen on my phone, and it's opened up a lot of functionality there. But won't belabor the point there. iPhone is pretty cool, pretty snazzy. But here's something. I don't know if it fits the model here.
Toaster oven. We know. Move on.
I was gonna say. I promise you that it at least fits in the. It fits the model better than Nathan's picks. So. It's not a toaster oven. It's not a microwave. But I'm going to go with a very small piece of technology, and that is my AirPods.
Oh, yeah. Good stuff.
For the naysayers out there, for the haters, especially when it first came out, I'm not going to lie. I was skeptical, but the AirPods are not just simply they're not simply just wireless AirPods or earbuds. They are they're not just another Bluetooth headset. They are, because Apple controls the hardware and the software, they're perfectly integrated with the iPhone. You pull them out of the box, boom, it pairs. I take them out of the case, it automatically pairs with my iPhone. A lot of issues that I have with traditional Bluetooth, I do not have with my AirPods, and they are amazing. And when I'm talking on the phone with them, people don't even know that I'm talking through Bluetooth, no less, a small piece in my ear. And so those are great. I love them. Like I said, I was hesitant to put it on the list because it's not necessarily a device, but they have the chip in there. There's a lot of processing power that goes into them. Like I said, it's more than just a Bluetooth headset.
Let me jump in on that real quick.
Yeah.
So I have them as well, and so I'm a huge audiophile. So I own, that's a running joke at work, is that I buy a set of headphones every week because I always show up with a different set. And I bought the AirPods right when they came out. And it was like a 6-week back order, and I didn't know how they were going to be either because everyone was like, you're going to lose them. They look stupid. But they're hands down for the size and the sound quality. I've owned, $250. I still have like the Bose headphones. I have the Solo 2s that I'm recording with now. I've had the Beats Studio. Nothing sounds as good or fits as well as those AirPods. And for $160, I think they're the best headphones or audio accessories on the market. I tried the Pixel Buds. They really suck. And you're right. Most of the third-party stuff just doesn't pair that W1 chip. I can bounce between my MacBook, my iPad, and my iPhone with like one click, and it's so smooth. It's insane. So AirPods are definitely a good pick for the list.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing too is, when they first came out, people were like, "Oh my goodness, $160 for these things." And I'm like, the people that were saying that, I was like, you obviously don't know anything about Bluetooth technology, because any of the, even medium end technology is at least twice that. And you've got Bluetooth headsets that are, $250 between $250 and $1,000. And so $160 for something that works as well as AirPods is a steal in my opinion, which is why it made the list. So for number 3 for me, I actually put in my Apple TV. So it's something that I use every day, not necessarily a personal device, but I'm able to stream anything from my phone. It's got with the newer generations, it's got apps. My wife and I, our entire marriage, we have never had cable. We've always just had an internet plan, and that's it. And almost every month they trying to convince me to, hey, you can upgrade to cable for an extra $10 a month. And I've never done it because with my Apple TV and Hulu and Netflix and other services that we use occasionally, the Apple TV pulls it all together, and it's not a perfect experience, but I've tried some of the other offerings from Google and Amazon, and have not been thrilled. And so I love my Apple TV, and it has made the list, and at least as a family we use it every day. And then finally, I'm going to back away from the Apple fandom, and I'm going to say Amazon Alexa, or Amazon Echo, I should say. I actually do not personally own one of these, so it's not necessarily a daily driver for me. But I agree with you, Rob, that Siri has been lacking. I think that there's some practical reasons for that related to privacy and what actually Apple allows to be kind of developed from a group perspective.
For sure.
But Amazon doesn't really care about privacy, and so the effect of that is, I kid, but the effect of that is that they've been able to develop that because they have they sell a product for cheap, and then they have, literally millions of people being, a massive case study for how to better develop their voice technology, and so it shows, and so they're constantly improving that, and so it's as far as advancements to voice technology. That's kind of the next wave as it relates to, obviously this is a podcast, and so audio books and audio mediums are becoming more and more of a thing, and Amazon Echo is a part of that, and so we'll see that continue to develop. And Apple's got its they've jumped into the ring now with their HomePod, and they're going to continue developing that as well. But no one beats Amazon as it relates to that right now. So
there was two things I wanted to mention. You bring up a really good point with Siri, because I complain about Siri a lot, but Apple has their privacy on lockdown, which is one of the reasons that I use mostly Apple stuff. One other honorable mention that I want to throw out there for people that hate Amazon because you can't use YouTube apps, or you have to use like the broke third-party app, or if you don't like Google because you can't use Amazon Prime, Roku that's what we use for all of our streaming stuff. I think we have like the Roku 2, and it is awesome. That's one of the reasons I haven't gotten Apple TV, is because it opens to every single platform. It's like the best of both worlds. So Roku's doing some good stuff, even though they get made fun of a lot.
There you go.
We do Apple TV. That's good. You know what's amazing? Is there any kind of device that kind of fizzled out than a smart TV? Yeah. I mean, I don't know anybody who's like, oh man, I gotta get the latest smart TV.
Well, I have one in my basement it has Roku on board. I don't know if that counts as Roku inside of it. So like there was like the old smart TV that just had like the smart apps loaded. I think that's probably different.
Yeah, because I mean, I have a smart TV. I mean, I never use it though. I have 2 Apple TVs that I use, and with the new Apple TV function within it, it's pretty awesome. So, all right. Anything else on tech?
No, I think that's sufficient.
All right. Post us, tell us send us your feedback. You are available on all the different socials at Money Power Pod, and you can always find us in the group like we talked about, and also info@moneypowerpod.com. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Sweet.
Got it.
All right. Outstanding. All right. Anything else you guys want to share with the world before we go off into the proverbial sunset?
Yeah. So last couple weeks, we've been making some announcements about this podcast network that we have. So we've received a few applications for people that want to be in the network. So basically what we're doing is we're creating a community of podcasts that have similar scope. It might be a little bit different. Like, for example, in culture, we're down with the true crime podcast. We would accept one of those. And mainly that's because we all like true crime. But the idea of the network is to advance political, financial, social, cultural ideologies, and have conversations and create better discourse and create a network of shows that fit within that scope. So it's not as though sports are off the table. I mean, that's completely fine. But it's, we're trying to keep things in a way where we're advancing positive discourse and good conversation surrounding topics that people care about. So if you want to join or apply to join the network, you can check out the requirements, the tiers. We have plans where we can help you get started up, do the hosting, help you start editing podcasts, do some training sessions. All that stuff is on there, depending on what tier that you'd like to jump in. It is moneypowerpod.com/application. And fill that out, and one of us will get back with you within 24 hours. Pretty simple.
Outstanding. All right. Well, guys, got another one in the can. It's great. And right. Next week is episode 25, so we may be doing a Facebook Live.
Yeah, so definitely follow us at Money Power Pod on Facebook at the very least to see announcement of the Facebook Live. And join the group, moneypowerpod.com/group, and you'll get notified there as well.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, I want to know what these guys look like.
You don't.
Facebook Live.
Said no one ever.
Yeah.
No one ever. At all.
Even my wife's like, you got that radio face. I like it.
Fair. All right. So for Jeremiah Martin, I'll actually mention him by name this time. For Rob Johnson, I am Nathan Martin, your host, saying good night and good luck.
I got the money in the power. Once you get a little, they just want to take you down, cuz we've been going hard for too long. Can't get enough, what is you on?